A retired K-9 police sergeant stopped on a snow-choked Michigan road when he saw a German Shepherd mother frozen beside a fence, a torn police badge patch pressed against her throat. She did not bark for help. She turned toward the black woods where two tiny cries were still fighting under the snow. Snow came off Lake Superior with a hard, sideways patience, whitening the pines outside Marquette, Michigan, until the whole road looked less like a road than a scar the forest had tried to cover. Daniel Hayes drove through it in a faded dark blue Ford Explorer that had once belonged to the Milwaukee Police Department and still smelled faintly of coffee, old leather, and wet dog, even though no dog had ridden in it for years. He had not meant to take County Road 550 that evening. That was what he told himself anyway. A man could claim the main highway was crowded, that the lake road was shorter, that the storm had made the turn hard to see. Daniel knew lies got smaller when spoken inside an empty vehicle, but they did not stop being lies. He had gone that way because the road passed an old maintenance fence, and beyond that fence lay timberland tied to a private development called North Star Harbor Lodge. And 4 years earlier, his former partner Brian Keller had said that name in a voice Daniel still heard when sleep ran thin. Daniel was 47 years old, tall and broad through the shoulders, though grief and bad dinners had carved him leaner than his old uniform photographs admitted. His brown hair was cut short, silvering at the temples, and his blue-gray eyes had the habit of finding mirrors, tree lines, parked trucks, and empty hands before they found a friendly face. On his sleeve, half hidden beneath sleet, was the old patch from the Milwaukee K-9 unit, frayed at one corner where a German Shepherd named Max had once caught it during training and refused to apologize. Daniel had retired after Brian died. Officially, his knee had never healed right. His sleep had grown unreliable, and his temper had become an administrative concern. Unofficially, he had walked away because Brian had been found in a ditch after a one-car crash, and the report had closed too neatly, and Daniel had been tired enough to let neatness pass for mercy. The heater in the Explorer coughed lukewarm air across a paper bag on the passenger floor. Bread, canned soup, batteries, and a small sack of puppy milk replacer he had bought without thinking. He had stood in the farm store aisle for almost a minute with the can in his hand, then placed it in the cart as if obeying an order he had not heard clearly. Now the can rolled each time the tires hit rutted ice, making a soft metal complaint against the beans. Daniel slowed near the old fence line. The sky had lowered itself until the headlights seemed to strike a wall. Fence posts appeared and vanished. Pine trunks leaned in and backed away. Then something stood beside the road. Not a shadow, not a blown branch. A dog. Daniel drove past by a few yards before his body believed what his eyes had already reported. He braked hard. The Explorer slid, corrected, and came to a stop at an angle with the rear tires half in the white ditch. For a moment he sat there, one gloved hand clamped on the wheel, breath held in his chest like it was waiting for permission. Outside, beside a steel fence post crusted with ice, stood a German Shepherd female. She was tied with a length of rope that had frozen into a pale, cruel cable around her neck. Snow had gathered on her back and shoulders until she looked carved from winter, but beneath the ice her coat showed black and tan with a cream chest and dark muzzle. Hunger had stolen the fullness from her. Her ribs pressed against wet fur. Her hips rose sharp beneath the skin. One ear stood straight. The other had a small torn notch near the tip. She did not sit. She did not lie down. She remained standing because some duty inside her body had not been relieved. That was what reached Daniel first. Not the rope, not the cold. The duty. He killed the engine. Silence rushed in, filled with wind, ticking metal, and the far sound of trees knocking together under ice. Daniel opened the door, and the cold hit him like an old accusation. He stepped down with his hands low and open, not walking straight toward her. He angled away, then curved in slowly, giving her a choice if she still had strength enough to take one. The dog watched him with amber eyes that were too clear for a dying animal and too tired for hope. "Easy," Daniel said, barely louder than the snow. "I am not here to make today worse." The dog's gaze shifted from his face to his sleeve. Daniel stopped. Her eyes had fixed on the old canine patch. Beneath the rope around her neck, half frozen into the fur, was another patch, smaller, torn, dark with dirt and ice. At first, Daniel thought it was just cloth caught under the knot. Then the wind lifted one ragged edge, and the gold stitching flashed through the white. Milwaukee Police Canine. His throat closed so fast it hurt. He stepped closer, one boot sinking deep through the crust. The dog did not flinch from the movement. She only trembled harder, legs spread for balance, breath coming in thin white streams. Daniel lowered himself carefully to one knee. Snow filled the crease of his jeans. The patch at her throat shifted again, and he saw 3 black letters stitched crookedly on the back edge, the ugly, practical kind of hand sewing only one man he knew had ever trusted. B.K. Brian Keller. The road disappeared for one bright second. Daniel was back in a training yard behind a Milwaukee precinct, watching Brian laugh as a young German shepherd stole his glove and made 7 grown officers negotiate like diplomats. Sadie, Brian had called her. Smart as a judge, mean as a tax bill, and loyal only after paperwork. Daniel heard Brian's laugh so clearly he almost turned his head. The dog in front of him stared into the snow. A pale scar crossed her muzzle. Daniel saw it, and his hand dropped. "Sadie?" he whispered. Her good ear twitched. Not trust, not even relief. Recognition, maybe, like a match struck in a room that had forgotten fire. Daniel pulled a folding knife from his coat pocket and turned the blade away from her before bringing it near the rope. She watched the knife. Of course she did. Working dogs noticed tools, hands, weight shifts, fear. Wounded ones noticed everything twice. "The rope," he said. "Not you." The first strand gave with a wet snap. Sadie shuddered. Daniel stopped, waited until her breathing steadied, then cut the second strand. The frozen coil fell at her feet. Free should have been a larger word. Sadie swayed as if freedom had come late and poorly dressed. Daniel caught her before she hit the snow, one arm under her chest, one hand supporting her ribs. She weighed almost nothing. That broke something quiet in him. Sadie Keller, the dog who had once flattened a training suspect in a padded suit and then sat on the man's boots with the dignity of a judge, weighed no more than a bundle of sticks wrapped in stubborn fur. Daniel carried her toward the explorer, but she twisted weakly in his arms. Her head turned past the fence, toward the black wall of pines. "No," he said. "Clinic first." Sadie opened her mouth and made a sound too dry to be a bark, too deliberate to be a whimper. Her teeth found his sleeve, gentle but exact. She pulled. Daniel looked where she looked. Beyond the fence, under fresh snow, a narrow trail bent into the trees. Human boot marks were half filled in. Drag marks crossed them. A broken branch pointed inward like a finger. From somewhere deep in the timber, beneath the wind, came a sound so small Daniel nearly missed it. A thin cry. Then another. Sadie pulled his sleeve again, and Daniel understood with a coldness deeper than the storm. She had not survived to be rescued. She had survived to lead him back. The snow thickened as Daniel stood with the Explorer door open. Sadie wrapped in an emergency blanket on the passenger seat, and the forest watching from beyond the fence like a room with no lights on. County Road 550 had gone empty. Marquette was only 15 miles away, close enough for warm windows and late coffee, far enough that help felt theoretical. The wind pushed at Daniel's back and slid icy fingers beneath his collar. Sadie lay against the cracked vinyl seat, every bone visible beneath the blanket, her amber eyes fixed on the pines. She had not looked once toward the heater, not at the bag of supplies, not at Daniel's hands. Only the trees. He had seen that look in working dogs before, the look that said the job was still open and no one had signed the report. "You are going to die if I let you drag me through there," he said. Sadie's teeth found his sleeve again, not hard, not begging, commanding. Daniel closed his eyes for half a breath. There were men who spent their lives confusing courage with noise. Brian had never been one of them. Brian had known that sometimes courage arrived as a quiet thing, with blood on its paws, asking you to follow before you understood why. Daniel reached behind the driver's seat and took out a heavy flashlight, a first aid pouch, a roll of gauze, his phone, and the old service pistol he had kept locked away for 3 years until the world began looking too familiar again. He slid the pistol inside his coat pocket, still holstered. A weapon in the hand made a man answer questions before the truth finished asking them. Then he lifted Sadie carefully. She made one small, strained sound as he moved her, and the sound went through him cleaner than any accusation. "All right," he murmured. "You lead. I carry." The old fence gate hung crooked, frozen into the ditch grass. Daniel stepped over a sagging section, boots breaking through snow crust to the wet dock underneath. The trail beyond had once been a maintenance access lane, maybe for county crews or the fish hatchery Brian had mentioned years ago. Now it was a white memory between pines, hidden enough that a person from the road would never notice unless a dying dog insisted. Sadie lifted her head in his arms at the first bend. Her nose moved right. Daniel turned right. At the second bend, she stiffened and stared left toward a hollow where the trees stood closer together. The flashlight beam cut through falling snow and struck the corner of a low building with a rusted green roof. It appeared piece by piece, first metal, then weathered boards, then a door hanging half open on one hinge, moving in the wind with a slow, tired tap. Daniel stopped 10 yards away. The smell reached him before the threshold did. Wet wood, animal waste, old straw, bleach, rust, and fear. Fear had a smell when it stayed too long in one place. Police officers joked about that because the truth of it made rooms harder to enter. Sadie trembled against his chest. "You do not have to go in," Daniel whispered. Her eyes stayed on the door. Then a sound came from inside, tiny, thin. A breath pulled across a broken reed. Daniel's arms tightened before he could stop them. Sadie answered with a dry scrape in her throat, pushing her head toward the building. "I hear it," he said. The words came out rough. He crossed the last stretch and set Sadie under the narrow overhang beside the door where less snow fell. Her legs shook so badly she had to lean into the wall. Daniel wanted to pick her up again, but she gave him a look that made the argument feel foolish. Even half dead, she had the old canine authority, the same expression she had used on patrol officers who dropped sandwich crumbs and denied it. He almost smiled. Almost. Inside, the abandoned fish hatchery office was colder than outside. The kind of trapped cold that had learned bitterness from wood and concrete. Daniel swept the flashlight across broken shelves, a collapsed desk, Cracked plastic tubs, empty feed sacks, coils of wire, and old pipes that had once carried water to tanks long gone dry. In the far corner, a steel ring had been bolted to a support beam. It was new. So was the short chain hanging from it. A dented bowl sat beneath, its water frozen solid, dark hairs caught in the ice. Sadie's hairs. Daniel stood still as anger rose in him, clean and useful at first, like heat in a hand. He did not let it move his feet. Anger could lift a door off its hinges. It could also step on evidence, miss breath, forget the living while serving the dead. The tiny cry came again from beneath the rear floor. Daniel lowered himself to one knee. Several boards had been laid unevenly across a shallow crawl space, not repaired, hidden. Straw had been pushed through the cracks. Some was fresh enough to still look yellow. Some was black with damp. He set the flashlight on its side, took off one glove, and felt along the warped edge of the nearest board. Loose. Not loose from age. Moved recently. He worked the knife under it and lifted carefully. The wood groaned. Sadie made a sound outside the door, higher than before, almost a plea. "I know," Daniel said, though he did not. The first board came up, then the second. The smell underneath struck him hard. Sour milk, wet straw, cold earth, and the sharp salt of newborn bodies that had fought too long. He forced himself to breathe through his mouth and look for movement, not meaning. Meaning could come later and hurt him then. Under a torn grain sack, something shifted. A puppy, small enough to fit into one palm, sable fur damp and flattened, eyes sealed, mouth opening without sound. Daniel slid both hands beneath it and lifted slowly, terrified by the weightlessness. "There you are," he whispered. The puppy shuddered once. Alive, barely. He tucked it beneath his coat against his shirt. Then the second cry came from deeper in the straw, so faint it seemed less heard than felt. Daniel moved another clump aside and found a smaller pup pressed against a piece of rotted wood, black and tan with a pale cream tip on the tail, colder than the first, but breathing. 2. His throat burned. He wrapped both puppies in his scarf, making a warm hollow under his jacket, close enough that his own heart might remind theirs what rhythm meant. Sadie dragged herself over the threshold. Not walked. Dragged. Her front paws pulled, her back legs followed badly, claws scraping across concrete and old straw. Daniel turned just in time to catch her before she collapsed beside the open floor. She stretched her neck toward the bundle in his coat. "Easy," Daniel said. "They are here. Both of them." The first puppy made a squeak like a rusty hinge. Sadie's whole body changed. She did not heal. Nothing that simple. But some terrible question inside her answered itself, and for 1 second she pressed her muzzle to the scarf with such care it seemed love itself had weight, and she was afraid of crushing it. Daniel looked around again. Now details sharpened. A second rope near the wall. Boot prints dried in mud beneath snow blown through the doorway. A strip of blue nylon caught on a nail. Scratches low on the boards where claws had fought. A fresh cigarette butt beside the door. Not an accident. Not weather. Someone had brought Sadie here, chained her, left her puppies beneath the floor, then tied the mother to a fence like a problem they meant winter to solve. Daniel pulled his phone with stiff fingers and took photographs. Chain, ring, bowl, boards, straw, boot marks, rope, nylon, scratches, the door, the exterior. Each camera flash felt too small for what it held, but small things built cases when grief only built holes. With one bar of service flickering at the top of the screen, He called the number painted on a magnet stuck to the dashboard back in the Explorer. Bennett Veterinary Care, emergency line. A woman answered on the second ring, voice awake in the hard way of people used to bad nights. "Dr. Bennett." "This is Daniel Hayes," he said. "County Road 550, Old Fish Hatchery Trail. I have a severely starved German Shepherd mother and 2 newborn pups. Hypothermic. Possible confinement evidence." There was no wasted surprise. "Are they breathing?" "Yes." "Warm them slowly. Body heat for the pups. No direct heat. Do not feed the mother anything heavy. Can you drive?" "Yes." "Then bring them now. Photograph everything you can without delaying transport." Daniel looked at Sadie's neck, at the raw groove beneath the torn canine patch. "Doctor, this may connect to missing police dogs." The line went quiet, not with shock, but recognition. "I was afraid you were going to say that," Claire Bennett said. "Get here fast." Daniel lifted Sadie and the scarf bundle together and carried them back through the trees. Snow filled his footprints behind him almost as soon as he made them. By the time the Explorer came into view, his hands had gone numb. But beneath his coat, 2 tiny bodies trembled against his chest, refusing to become memory. Bennett Veterinary Care sat between a closed laundromat and a bait shop on the north edge of Marquette, its windows glowing warm against the storm, while the rest of the strip mall looked surrendered to snow. By the time Daniel pulled into the lot, the windshield wipers were fighting more ice than glass, and Sadie lay across the passenger seat with her head angled toward the scarf bundle under his coat. She had not slept. Mothers near death did not sleep while breath still needed counting. Dr. Claire Bennett opened the clinic door before Daniel killed the engine. She was 34, tall and spare, with auburn hair tied low at the back of her neck, green eyes sharpened by exhaustion, and blue scrubs half hidden beneath a brown canvas coat. She wore rubber boots without socks, which told Daniel she had dressed in a hurry and would later pretend that was a professional choice. "Treatment room," she said. No questions. Daniel obeyed. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, damp fur, old coffee, and the metallic edge of worry. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Warm towels waited in a plastic bin near the sink. Claire moved with quick steadiness, not softness. Softness asked to be noticed. Steadiness did the work. She examined Sadie first, checking gums, ribs, abdomen, paws, temperature, neck. Sadie watched every movement, her amber eyes cloudy with fever and command. Claire placed one hand near the dog's muzzle, not touching until Sadie allowed it. "You have had a rotten day, ma'am," Claire murmured. "Try not to make it your last." Sadie blinked once, unimpressed. Daniel stood at the end of the table, one hand hovering near Sadie's shoulder. He did not touch the wound. He had learned long ago that help could become pressure if it arrived without permission. Claire noticed. Of course she did. Good veterinarians read rooms as carefully as bodies. She slid an IV catheter into a front leg with more competence than beauty, wrapped it, started fluids, and spoke to Sadie the whole time in a voice meant for the animal, not the man watching. "Slow and boring," she said. "That is our plan. Everybody loves slow and boring once they survive dramatic." Across the room, she placed the puppies in a towel-lined box under a low warming lamp, with a heating pad beneath only half the surface. "So they can move off heat if they need to," she said before Daniel asked. One puppy opened its mouth and squeaked. The other only shivered. Claire used a dropper, then a tiny bottle, feeding each a careful amount of warmed formula. Daniel remembered the can rolling on his passenger floor and felt something cold shift behind his ribs. Maybe instinct was just grief hearing a future before the mind caught up. "Male," Claire said, checking the larger pup. "Stubborn heartbeat. Dramatic feet." She turned to the smaller. "Female." Cold, but not leaving yet. Names? Daniel asked, then hated himself a little for asking because names were promises. Claire glanced up. You found them under a floor in a blizzard. I think they have already earned better administration than male and female. Daniel looked at the male pup, sable and damp, tiny muzzle moving as if arguing with sleep. Toby, he said. The name surprised him by being ordinary. The female curled her pale-tipped tail against the towel, silent but alive. Molly. Claire nodded as if entering a legal record. Toby and Molly it is. Sadie, you approve? Sadie's ear moved toward the box. Her head tried to lift. Her body failed before the thought became action. Claire placed one gentle hand against her shoulder. Not yet. You can supervise from there. Sadie did not like the ruling. She accepted it because her body had staged a quiet coup. When Claire began cleaning the wound around Sadie's neck, the room changed. The rope burn was ugly, raw and dark where ice had tightened it. But beneath it ran a narrower line, repeated pressure scarred into the skin. Claire parted the fur with gloved fingers. This was not farm rope alone. Daniel leaned closer. What was it? Training cinch, or restraint line. Something used by people who know working dogs, or people who steal the language of training to make cruelty sound skilled. She photographed the injury, then the cracked pads, torn dew claw, bruising beneath the belly, and abrasions along the ribs. Each flash became a nail in a door Daniel had once chosen not to open. Claire lifted the torn patch from beneath the loosened rope and placed it on gauze. It was dark blue, frayed, stiff with dried blood and ice melt. Milwaukee Police Canine Unit. On the back, black thread formed crooked letters. B.K. Daniel put both hands on the counter because the room had leaned. Brian Keller, he said. Claire's eyes moved from the patch to Sadie. Your partner? My friend. That was smaller than the truth, but he had no larger word that would fit through his throat. His dog was reported dead? Transferred after he died, then reported euthanized from complications. That is what his sister was told. That is what I let myself believe. Claire said nothing for a moment. Silence, when used properly, was not empty. It gave shame room to stop performing. Then she opened the office door and revealed a corkboard above a cluttered desk. 7 photographs hung there, some printed, some copied from shelter reports. A black Labrador with an infected paw. A tan Belgian Malinois with a shaved patch where a microchip had been cut out. A Dutch Shepherd mix wearing the remains of a therapy vest. A white shepherd terrified of diesel engines. A retired search dog found dead near a culvert before Claire arrived. 2 empty spaces marked with sticky notes and dates. I have been keeping this off the official wall, Claire said. Not because I am hiding it. Because every time I take it to Sheriff Ellison, he tells me winter makes dogs wander. Old dogs run. Grief makes owners remember things wrong. Daniel studied the map beside the photos. Pins clustered near access roads behind North Star Harbor Lodge, a private resort project south of the Lake Road. These are all trained dogs. Police, search and rescue, veteran assistance, therapy, retired patrol. Dogs that understand commands. Dogs someone could repurpose if they did not care what broke in the process. Toby squeaked from the warming box. Sadie's ear flicked. Daniel looked from the puppies to the board, then to the patch on gauze. He could hear Brian's voice again, lower than laughter this time. Something is off, Danny. The paperwork is too clean. Daniel had told him to sleep, to stop chasing ghosts, to let internal affairs do its job. He had been tired. That was the coward's favorite costume. Claire sealed the patch in a clear evidence bag. "Does Brian have family?" she asked. Daniel took out his phone. The contact remained there because deleting a name had always felt too much like a second burial. Rachel Keller. He had not called her in almost 4 years. After the funeral, after the casserole, church ladies, and folded flag and official condolences, silence had convinced both of them it was kinder than the truth. The phone rang 6 times. A woman answered, voice thick with sleep and caution. "Hello?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Rachel, it is Daniel Hayes." The silence had a shape. "What happened?" she asked, because families of police officers learned there were few good reasons for midnight calls. Daniel looked at Sadie lying beneath heated blankets, at Toby and Molly breathing under the lamp, at the patch that should have been ashes in the past. He did not start with comfort. There was none honest enough. "I found Sadie," he said. Rachel made one small sound, then nothing. "She is alive. Bad shape, but alive. She had 2 puppies with her." "No," Rachel whispered. "They told us she died." Daniel's hand tightened around the phone. "They lied." Claire looked at him across the room, and in her eyes he saw not surprise, but the grim relief of a pattern confirmed. Rachel's breathing changed. When she spoke again, grief had become something sharper. "Where are you?" "Marquette. Bennett Veterinary Care." "I am coming." "Rachel, the roads are bad." "Daniel," she said, and for the first time in 4 years she sounded exactly like Brian. "I said I am coming." After the call ended, Daniel stood beside Sadie while Claire fed Molly another drop. Outside, a plow scraped past the clinic, diesel engine rumbling low through the glass. Sadie's body stiffened at once. Her head lifted, eyes locked on the door, breath quick and shallow. Claire saw it. Daniel saw it. The sound faded down the street, but Sadie kept staring. Not panic. Memory. The kind with wheels, doors, and men who did not call cruelty by its name. Morning came to Marquette without warmth. Only a paler shade of snow pressed against the clinic windows, and a sky the color of old tin. Inside Bennett Veterinary Care, the world had been reduced to breath, fluids, towels, and the fragile schedule of tiny stomachs. Sadie slept at last, though sleep was too generous a word for the guarded stillness of a mother whose body still expected harm to return through the door. Toby and Molly lay in their warmed box, tucked side by side under a fold of fleece. Toby squeaked whenever the room got too quiet, as if silence offended him. Molly stayed tucked close to his ribs, conserving herself with the grave wisdom of a creature 2 weeks old and already unimpressed by human management. Daniel had not slept. He sat in a hard plastic chair beside Sadie's table, coffee untouched in his hand, old police jacket hanging over the back. Claire moved around him with the tolerant irritation of someone too tired to waste energy on obvious lectures. "You know chairs are not medical devices," she said, checking Sadie's drip. "If you pass out in one, I am billing you as furniture damage." Daniel looked at the paper cup. "This coffee might count as assault. It came from my machine. It has immunity." For 1 second, something almost normal crossed the room. Then headlights swept the front glass, and an aging blue Subaru pulled into the lot with snow packed around the wheel wells. Rachel Keller sat behind the wheel a full minute before she opened the door. Daniel watched from the treatment room window. She was 32 now, smaller than memory, with brown hair braided tightly over one shoulder and hazel eyes that had Brian's stubborn brightness even before she stepped into the light. She wore a gray wool coat, jeans tucked into winter boots, and carried a cardboard file box pressed against her chest as if grief might spill out if she loosened her arms. Daniel opened the clinic door. Rachel looked at him once. No hug. No accusation. Those would have been simpler. She stepped inside, and the warmth hit her glasses with fog. Where is she? Daniel led her back. Sadie lay with her head low, bandaged neck resting on a towel, IV line taped along one front leg. The black and tan coat that had once shone in Brian's photographs was dull, broken by shaved patches and scabs. But the eyes were Sadie's. Rachel saw her, and the file box slipped. Daniel caught it before it hit the floor. "Oh, girl," Rachel whispered. She lowered herself slowly, not rushing, not reaching. That mattered. Animals betrayed by hands did not need love arriving as another grab. Rachel folded her fingers in her lap and waited. Sadie opened her eyes. For a long moment, nothing moved except the drip in the IV line. Then Sadie lifted her head 2 inches, an act so costly Claire stepped forward and stopped herself. Sadie's nose stretched toward Rachel's boot and touched the leather toe. Rachel covered her mouth, but the tears came anyway, straight down, quiet enough not to frighten the dog. "I am sorry," she said. Sadie's ear twitched, the notched one, and Rachel broke a little more. Toby objected from the warming box. Claire lifted him with both hands. "This loud gentleman is Toby. His sister is Molly. They have opinions about timing." Rachel gave a wet laugh that sounded painful but real. "Brian would have named him something awful." Daniel nodded. "Sergeant Pickle." Rachel looked up through tears. "He named his coffee mug Denise because he said Denise had seen things." "He did not deserve a badge," Daniel said. "Maybe a supervised badge." The memory made room for air. Not much. Enough. Claire fed Toby while Rachel opened the file box on the exam counter. Inside were photographs, envelopes from police administration, a green notebook with bent corners, a small stack of veterinary papers, and a black USB drive taped inside an old Altoids tin. On the lid, Brian's handwriting said, "If this becomes a mess, give it to someone with no hobbies." Daniel stared at it. Claire leaned closer. "That is either evidence or an insult." Rachel wiped her face. "With Brian, often both." The photographs came first. Brian at 25, grinning in uniform beside a squad car. Brian on a training field, one hand on Sadie's chest, while she stared away from the camera with regal boredom. Brian and Daniel after a canine certification, both younger, both pretending exhaustion was humor. Rachel set those aside like small candles. The notebook started ordinary. Feeding notes, training observations, command reinforcement, jokes about Sadie's hatred of cheap treats. Then the handwriting changed. Shorter lines, less laughter. Names circled. Dates, transfer agencies. Retired canines moved after handlers died, officers resigned, or families signed release forms while grieving. Private rescue groups with patriotic names. Blue Line Canine Renewal. Shielded Paws Recovery. Valor Canine Restorations. Records that ended abruptly after transfer. "He never told me this much," Rachel said. "He tried," Daniel replied, and the admission tasted like rust. "I told him to slow down." Claire photographed the pages with her phone. "People who use grief to get signatures love speed," she said. Rachel pulled a folded document from an envelope. "This is what I signed after the funeral. The man said Sadie needed specialized care. He knew Brian's unit, her commands, the injury she had in her left hip. He wore a police foundation jacket. He said it was what Brian wanted." Daniel looked at the signature line. Blue Line Canine Renewal. Witnessed by Neil Carver, legal advisor. Claire's face changed. "I know that name. She opened her laptop, fingers moving fast despite fatigue. A saved screenshot appeared from North Star Harbor Lodge's advisory page. Neil Carver stood beside Victor Lang, the developer whose money had wrapped half the lake road in cedar signs and legal notices. Carver was thin-faced, silver-haired, smiling the way some men smiled when truth was only a negotiation they expected to win. Land Acquisition and Regulatory Council, Claire read. Also listed as consultant to North Star Shield. Rachel's mouth went flat. They stole her from a funeral. No one corrected her. Claire inserted the USB. The laptop took too long, as if old technology enjoyed cruelty. At last, folders opened, scanned records, photos, spreadsheets, video files. Claire clicked the shortest video. Brian appeared on screen, sitting in a storage room under bad light, one cheek bruised yellow near the eye. Sadie lay at the edge of the frame, younger, healthy, alert. The clinic went still. If you are seeing this, Brian said, then I either got paranoid enough to embarrass myself or not paranoid enough to stay breathing. Rachel made a small sound. Daniel did not move. Brian leaned closer. There is a pipeline moving retired and displaced working dogs into private hands. Paperwork gets cleaned. Chips get cut out. Dogs get renamed and sold as security assets. Some go to contractors. Some go to rich fools who want obedience without earning trust. I have names. Not enough proof. If anything happens to me, find Sadie. Do not trust release forms. Do not trust charities that borrow our badge language. Sadie knows roots. Sadie knows sense. She will remember what people forget on purpose. He paused, then looked into the camera. Danny, if this reaches you, I am sorry. You were always better at doors than paperwork. Follow the dog. The video ended. No music, no mercy. Just black screen and the hum of the clinic lights. Daniel stepped back until his shoulders touched the wall. To most people, he would have looked calm. Claire knew better. Rachel knew better. Sadie lifted her head and made one low sound. Molly squeaked then, offended by the emotional pace of adults. The sound crossed the room like a small rope thrown into deep water. Daniel breathed. Once, twice. He looked at the frozen image of Brian, then at Sadie, then at the two puppies who should have died before anyone knew their names. We make copies, Claire said. We verify documents. We do not give this to Sheriff Ellison first. Rachel closed the tin with careful fingers. What do we do after that? Outside, a diesel truck passed along the road, its engine low and heavy. Sadie's body stiffened, but this time Daniel was already beside her. He placed 2 fingers near her shoulder, not pressing, just present. The truck faded. Sadie stayed. Daniel looked toward the corkboard of missing dogs. We find where they kept her, he said. Claire's eyes moved to the map, to the cluster of pins behind North Star Harbor Lodge. I think I already know. Late morning laid a thin gray light over Marquette, the kind that made every snowbank look tired, and every road sign look like it had given up arguing with winter. Sadie slept under heated blankets at Bennett Veterinary Care, Toby and Molly tucked in their box beside her where she could see them whenever her eyes opened. Daniel wanted to stay. Wanting had very little to do with what the day required. Claire changed Sadie's fluids, checked both puppies, then stood with her hands on her hips and looked at him as if you were another patient refusing treatment. 2 hours, she said. That is all I can be gone. Sadie needs monitoring and the pups need feeding on schedule. If this turns into a heroic wandering tour, I will sedate you with the livestock supplies. That legal? Daniel asked. Depends who finds out. She grabbed her coat. They left the clinic through the back because the front windows faced the road, and Daniel had spent enough years learning that being watched often began before anyone admitted there was a watcher. Claire drove her old green Subaru because Daniel's Explorer had probably been seen near the fence. The Subaru's heater made a sound like a drawer full of spoons, but it worked. They followed County Road 550 north, past pine stands and frozen driveways, then turned toward the lake road where North Star Harbor Lodge had planted its first enormous sign. The sign rose from the snow on cedar posts, glossy and self-important. North Star Harbor Lodge, heritage living on Superior's shore. Behind the words, an artist's rendering showed glass cabins, stone fireplaces, clean boots, smiling couples, and a golden retriever by a fire pit that had never smelled real smoke. Daniel slowed as they passed. "Heritage," Claire said. "People love that word when they are about to remove something old." The access road behind the development had not been plowed for the public, but heavy trucks had packed 2 hard ruts into the snow. Daniel parked the Subaru behind a stand of balsam firs, nose pointed out. Claire noticed and said nothing. Old habits did not need applause. They walked along the back service lane, keeping to the trees when they could. The air smelled of cut timber, diesel, lake ice, and the cold mineral scent of exposed earth. Orange survey flags poked through the snow like little warnings nobody had listened to. A new chain-link fence ran along the front of the construction pad, but near the rear, where the service lane bent toward the old hatchery property, the fence ended unfinished. Snow covered the gap badly, which was to say not at all. "That lane used to be county access," Claire said. "Still is?" Daniel asked. "Depends whether you are asking the county map or the men paying the county's favorite lawyer." They crossed through the gap and moved behind 2 portable offices. No workers were visible. Tarps covered equipment. The big lodge foundations sat under snow, concrete footings waiting for money to turn them into inevitability. 50 yards beyond the main pad stood a long metal outbuilding partly hidden by stacked lumber and 2 white trailers. It carried no logo, no permit sheet, no sign. Snow had been shoveled away from the side door recently. Daniel crouched by the threshold and touched the packed snow. Fresh scrape marks, boot prints, a faint line where something wheeled had passed. Claire leaned near the crack at the bottom of the door, then recoiled slightly. "Kennel cleaner," she said. Daniel smelled it too. Bleach, disinfectant, damp concrete, and under it the sour animal smell people tried to bury because it told the truth without needing a warrant. He tried the handle. Unlocked. Claire gave him a look. "Unlocked does not mean welcome." "No," Daniel said. "It means hurried." Inside, the building was dim except for gray light leaking through high plastic windows. The smell was stronger. Along the left wall sat 8 portable kennels made from welded panels, new and heavy, each with a water hook and a drain beneath it. 2 bowls lay overturned near the back. One held frozen yellow water and dark hairs trapped at the edge. On the concrete floor, claw marks scored the area near a gate latch. Claire's face went still, the way anger looked on people who did not waste it. She took photographs openly at first, then more carefully, kneeling for angles that showed scale and condition. Daniel moved down the room without touching more than necessary. On a folding table sat invoices printed on cheap paper. Sedatives, chain leads, muzzles, bite sleeves, disinfectant, bulk dog food. Buyer name abbreviated. NS Shield Operations. Under the table, a plastic storage bin held collars. Leather, nylon, tactical styles with Velcro panels where names had been removed. Several identification plates were cut out with a blade. One buckle held black and tan hairs caught in the seam. Claire pulled an evidence bag from her coat. Daniel looked at her. You carry those? 7 missing dogs give a woman hobbies. A green clipboard hung on a nail beside the door. Daniel lifted it carefully. At first, the sheet looked like inventory. Codes, dates, handler initials, condition notes. K9-DU hold. K9-LAB transferred. K9-MAL unstable, remove chip. Then one line stopped him cold. K9-SAD relocate before county review. Written casually, as if moving a starving mother before inspection were the same as moving lumber out of rain. Claire stepped beside him and saw it. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Daniel took a photograph, then another closer. Outside, a truck door shut. Daniel lowered the clipboard exactly where he had found it. The side door opened before he reached the wall. Victor Lang stepped inside with snow on expensive boots and a smile that had practiced surviving rooms full of poorer men. He was 51, tall and narrow, gym-built beneath a charcoal parka, iron gray hair combed back, trimmed beard too precise for weather. His pale blue eyes looked friendly until they found resistance. Dr. Bennett, he said. Mr. Hayes, I wondered how long curiosity would take. Claire did not hide her phone. This building is accessible from a county service lane with no posted restriction. Victor's smile warmed by 1 degree and froze there. That is a charming legal theory for a veterinarian. Daniel said nothing. Victor's gaze moved to him and lingered. And you must be the retired officer who found the dog. Daniel Hayes, former Milwaukee canine. Decorated, then troubled. A complicated file from what I hear. Claire looked sharply at Daniel, then back to Victor. You keep dogs here. We contract security assessments. Rural construction sites attract thieves, activists, coyotes, unstable locals, and occasionally former policemen who mistake nostalgia for jurisdiction. The words were polished smooth, too smooth. Daniel felt the old part of himself rise toward them, the part trained to step forward when a man used clean language over dirty work. Victor saw it and almost smiled with his eyes. Be careful, Victor said softly. A retired officer trespassing with a local veterinarian, making accusations over a stray animal during a storm. It can look like concern, or it can look like instability. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up outside, tires crunching over packed snow. Victor had not touched his phone. Daniel noticed that. Sheriff Mark Ellison entered without knocking, broad-shouldered beneath a tan winter jacket, gray mustache neat, heavy-lidded eyes carrying the slow patience of a man obeyed too often in small rooms. Daniel, he said, as if they were meeting at a diner. Claire. His eyes moved around the kennel room and did not stop where honest eyes would stop. Not on the collars, not on the clipboard, not on the bowls. You two need to leave. Claire's voice stayed level. There are signs of animal confinement here. I have an injured German shepherd at my clinic with restraint wounds matching equipment of this type. Ellison sighed with rehearsed kindness. I know you care. Caring is not a warrant. Daniel looked at him. A dog was tied to a fence and left to freeze. That is being looked into. By who? Ellison's eyes hardened. By people who know how not to turn one dog into a war. Victor lowered his gaze as if hiding amusement out of respect. Daniel kept his right hand loose. His phone in his coat pocket was still recording because old habits sometimes were gifts. Ellison stepped closer. Men like you need to know when to stand down, son. You have been through enough. There it was. Not concern. A leash made from sympathy. Claire saw it. and Daniel watched understanding settle behind her eyes. The sheriff was not lazy. He was placed. "Are we being arrested?" she asked. "You are being warned," Ellison said. Daniel nodded once, slow, then let Claire lead the way out because leaving with evidence was better than staying with pride. At the Subaru, neither spoke until the doors closed. Then Claire opened a secure message thread and attached the photographs. The contact name read Megan Price. Her typed message was short. "Found where the dogs were kept. North Star. Sheriff protecting them." Daniel started the car. Behind them, the glossy North Star sign promised heritage, peace, and lakefront luxury. In his pocket, Daniel's phone held Victor's threat, Ellison's warning, and Sadie's name beside the word relocate. For the first time since finding her in the snow, Daniel understood that Sadie had not only led him to Toby and Molly, she had led him to the door of the machine that had tried to erase them. By afternoon, the storm had thinned into drifting powder, and Marquette wore that strange post-blizzard quiet that made ordinary sounds seem guilty. Bennett Veterinary Care stayed closed to regular appointments, though 3 people called about nail trims, and 1 man wanted to know whether his parakeet could be depressed by weather. Claire answered none of them. She had Sadie on the treatment floor with blankets beneath her ribs, Toby and Molly in their warmed box, Daniel at the counter with Brian's notebook, and Rachel making copies with the focus of a woman who had decided grief could be useful if given office supplies. The clinic smelled of formula, wet fur, printer heat, and coffee that had long ago surrendered any connection to joy. Sadie had eaten 2 spoonfuls of softened food from Claire's fingers, then turned her head away with the exhausted dignity of a queen declining bad soup. "Progress," Claire said. She insulted my cooking with her whole face. Toby squeaked in agreement. Molly slept through the controversy, her pale tail tip twitching once. Rachel stood over the copier, watching Brian's pages slide beneath the glass. "He was tracking transfers for months," she said. "Maybe longer. I thought these were work notes. I did not want to read them because every page sounded like him, and I was tired of losing him again." Daniel looked at the notebook. Brian's handwriting had never been neat, but near the end it had become tight and compressed, names squeezed into margins as if paper itself might betray him. Blue Line Canine Renewal appeared 6 times. So did North Star Shield. Neil Carver. 2 retired dogs from Illinois, 1 from Wisconsin, 1 from Michigan. A note circled in red. Family signatures obtained within 72 hours of handler death or hospitalization. Daniel read that line 3 times. "They moved fast because families were broken," Rachel said. Her voice did not shake. That made it worse. Claire's phone buzzed on the counter. Megan Price's name filled the screen. Claire put it on speaker. "Tell me something that does not make me want to bite a wall." "Unlikely," Megan said. Her voice was low and quick, with road noise behind it. Blue Line Canine Renewal is a shell nonprofit, registered in Wisconsin, mailing address changed 3 times in 4 years. Board members are either retired on paper or impossible to find. It received donations from North Star Shield through a community safety initiative, then transferred assets to private training contractors in Michigan, Idaho, and Nevada. Rachel looked up. "Assets means dogs." "Yes," Megan said. "They use words that sound clean in court. Asset, relocation, stabilization, behavioral reassignment. My favorite is compassionate transfer, which appears beside 3 dogs whose chips were removed within a week." Daniel closed his hand around the edge of the counter. Sadie's eyes opened. She watched him, weak, fevered, and unimpressed by rage. Daniel loosened his grip. "Victor Lang?" he asked. "Developer, investor, former private security executive," Megan said. North Star Harbor Lodge is the shiny front. North Star Shield provides construction security, executive protection, and canine asset consulting. Neil Carver handles land permits and non-profit paperwork. Sheriff Ellison's campaign received donations from North Star vendors, not directly, because villains have accountants now. Claire rubbed both hands over her face. I sent you photos. I saw. Kennels, collars, invoices, Sadie's code. Good. Not enough alone, but good. I am driving up from Milwaukee. Should be there by tonight if the roads do not decide to become theological. Rachel almost smiled. Brian would have liked you. Then Brian had excellent taste and questionable survival instincts. The line went quiet for half a second, respectful without turning soft. I am sorry, Megan added. I watched his video. Claire sent it encrypted. He knew more than he could prove. Daniel looked at the laptop where Brian's face remained frozen at the last frame. So did I, he said. No one filled the space after that. Toby did, eventually, with a squeak that sounded irritated by adult guilt. Claire lifted him, warmed a bottle, and handed it to Rachel. Here, feed the loud one. Grief does better with instructions. Rachel took the puppy carefully, supporting his head the way Claire showed her. Toby latched with blind determination, tiny paws flexing against her finger. Rachel's face changed as she watched him. Not healed, nothing that cheap, but anchored. Molly woke a few minutes later and drank more slowly, her body pressed against Rachel's palm like a little coal of life. Sadie watched both feedings. Her head stayed low, but every time a puppy made a sound, her eyes moved. Daniel sat beside her. You did your job, he said quietly. Sadie's gaze shifted to him. I know. Still more job. You do not have to tell me. Claire gave him a sidelong look. Are you arguing with a medically unstable German Shepherd? She started it. She is winning. The small humor did not erase the ugliness on the corkboard, but it kept the room from becoming another kennel. Late in the day, Megan sent a file packet. Corporate filings, photographs, a donor chart, license records, and a county maintenance map from before North Star's purchase. The old fish hatchery sat on a strip of land still disputed between county access and private easement. North Star had no clear right to lock it. Claire tapped the map. That is why they used it. Hidden enough, muddy enough legally, and close to their service road. Daniel compared Brian's notes to the county map. One line in the notebook read, hatchery route, diesel box truck, Sunday transfers. He felt the room tilt again, but this time he stayed upright. Rachel leaned over his shoulder. Brian wrote that 2 weeks before he died. Daniel nodded. He was following the route. And then he crashed. No one said accident. The word had lost its manners. Claire saved copies of everything to 2 drives, then a third. Rachel uploaded encrypted files to Megan. Daniel photographed Brian's notebook page by page, hands steady because the shaking had moved deeper and become something else. Around 7, Sadie startled awake. A diesel engine passed outside, low and heavy, slowing near the clinic before moving on. Her body stiffened, lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. Toby and Molly began squeaking, disturbed by their mother's fear. Daniel moved toward the window, but Claire caught his sleeve. No chasing shadows. It slowed. I heard. Her voice was calm enough to be serious. She checked the security camera feed on her laptop. A dark pickup had paused at the corner, plates obscured by snow. Not enough. Always not enough. Megan called again at 9:17 that night. This time, the road noise was gone. I am in Marquette, she said, parked behind the feed store. Listen carefully. North Star Shield filed a late equipment transfer with the county system 30 minutes ago. It was backdated to yesterday, badly. One white utility truck just left their lower yard headed toward the Hatchery Road. Claire straightened. Rachel still held Molly, who had fallen asleep against her wrist. "They are cleaning the site," Daniel said. Sadie heard something in his tone. Her head lifted. "Probably," Megan said. "Victor is with them. I have a source watching the yard. They are moving tonight because they know you have photos." Claire looked at Sadie. "No." Sadie tried to stand. Her legs trembled, failed, then tried again. "Absolutely no," Claire said to the dog. "You are not a deputy. You are not evidence on legs. You are a patient with stitches and authority issues." Sadie took one unsteady step toward Daniel. Toby woke and squeaked in protest. Sadie looked back at him, then toward the door again. Rachel swallowed. She knows the place. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. He wanted one clean choice. Leave Sadie safe. Go without her. Protect the living. But Sadie had crossed hunger, ropes, snow, and terror to point at truth when no human report would hold still. Some witnesses did not speak in court. Some led you through trees and dared you to be worthy of following. Claire saw the decision forming and hated it before it finished. "If she goes," she said, "she stays wrapped, in the car, unless I say otherwise." Daniel nodded. Megan's voice sharpened. "Do not call Sheriff Ellison." "I was not planning to," Claire said. "I have a Michigan State Police contact from a livestock case. They need live evidence if local law is compromised." Rachel lifted her phone. "I can record plates." "Good," Megan said. "Record everything." "Do not become the story, if you can help it." Daniel looked at Sadie, then at Toby and Molly in their box, then at Brian's frozen image on the laptop. "Too late for that," he said. Night settled over the North Road in layers. Black pine, white snow, low cloud, then the faint yellow pulse of work lights where no honest work should have been happening. Claire drove the Subaru with headlights off for the last 100 yards, tires whispering over packed snow, her hands tight on the wheel but not shaking. Daniel sat beside her with Sadie wrapped in 2 blankets across his lap, her muzzle visible above the wool, her amber eyes open and fixed on the dark ahead. Rachel sat in the back with Toby and Molly tucked into a thermal pouch against her chest because Sadie became frantic when the puppies left her line of sight. The pups slept through danger with the rude confidence of the very young. Behind them, Megan Price coasted her black Jeep into the tree cover, engine off before the brake lights could fully glow. She climbed out wearing a dark beanie, gray field jacket, black gloves, and a small camera rig clipped to her chest. She did not look like television. She looked like a problem with extra batteries. "Recording is already running," she whispered when they gathered under the trees. "Livestream goes live when I see faces, logos, or something moving that should not be moving." Claire checked her phone. "Captain Ruiz says state police are 20 minutes out, maybe 15 if the roads hold." "Then we give her 15 minutes of reasons," Megan said. Daniel adjusted Sadie's blanket. "She should stay in the car." Sadie made a low sound, not loud, but every person there understood the ruling. Rachel touched the thermal pouch where Toby stirred. "If she cannot see the pups, she will fight us. If she cannot see you, she will fight harder." Claire looked at Daniel. "You carry her. If I say stop, you stop. If she crashes, we leave, and I keep her alive. Evidence matters, but living matters first." Daniel nodded. That was easier than saying he was afraid. They moved through the trees on foot. The snow had stopped, but branches still released white powder whenever the wind brushed them. The old fish hatchery hollow opened below, changed from the forgotten ruin Daniel had found into a bright, ugly stage. Two trucks sat outside. A white utility truck with North Star maintenance decals partly scraped away, and a black diesel pickup with mud across its plates. Work lights stood on tripods, throwing hard shadows against the hatchery walls. Men moved in the glare. One dragged kennel panels from the doorway, another carried plastic bins. A third, taller and cleaner in movement, stood near the trucks with a phone in one gloved hand. Victor Lang wore a charcoal parka and a wool cap that probably cost more than Daniel's boots. Beside him, Troy Adams, heavy-set and red-faced with a shaved head, shoved a bundle of chain leads into a bin. Evan Pike, thin and younger, maybe 30, with a patchy beard and fast, nervous eyes, kept glancing toward the road as if regret had headlights. Victor's voice carried through the cold. Everything with hair, blood, tags, food records, the floorboards if you have to. We are not leaving some retired cop a shrine. Daniel's hand closed beneath Sadie's blanket. Sadie felt it. Her head turned toward him, and her teeth found his sleeve, gentle enough not to tear. Claire leaned close. No. He did not answer. Troy dragged another kennel from the building. It scraped over frozen ground with a sound that ran up Daniel's spine like wire. Then something inside moved. A dog, alive, lean and tan with a black face, ears flattened hard against his skull. Belgian Malinois. One paw wrapped in dirty tape. A strip of nylon hung from his neck where a collar had been cut away. He was maybe 4 years old, though restraint and fear had carved age into every line of him. He did not bark when Troy kicked the kennel to force it flat against the truck bed. He flinched and went silent. Claire inhaled sharply. That is Duke. From my board. Retired Traverse City canine. Vanished before transfer. Daniel shifted forward. Claire's hand caught his sleeve so hard her nails bit through denim. Evidence first. If you run down there, they make this about you. We save all of them, Daniel. Not just this minute. The old part of him offered simple math. Distance, angle, first man, second, keys, dog, Victor. End the problem before law arrived late again. Sadie's teeth tightened on his sleeve. Not a bite, a reminder. Daniel looked down. Her amber eyes held his, weak, fevered, certain. Brian's voice rose from the video in memory. Follow the dog. Sadie knows sense. Sadie knows roots. Daniel breathed once. Facts walk first, Claire whispered. Megan moved to a clearer angle behind a cedar trunk, raising her phone. Rachel lifted hers and began recording plates, faces, logos, kennel panels, bins, the living dog. Her hand shook once. She steadied it with the other. Claire dialed Captain Ruiz's direct number. This is Dr. Claire Bennett, she whispered. We have live removal of animal confinement evidence from the old county hatchery north of Marquette. North Star vehicles present. Victor Lang present. One live Belgian Malinois in a kennel. Sheriff Ellison should not be notified first. Below, Evan stopped moving. He had seen something, maybe a screen reflection, maybe Sadie's pale breath in the dark, maybe his own conscience finally growing eyes. Mr. Lang, he called. Victor turned. For 1 second, the hollow froze. Then everything moved. Troy shoved the kennel toward the utility truck. The Malinois slid hard against the wire and made one sharp sound. Victor snapped an order Daniel could not hear. Evan ran toward the driver's door of the black pickup, then stopped as Megan stepped out of the trees into the work lights. Her camera was raised. Her voice cut through the cold, clear and flat. Victor Lang, Megan Price, Great Lakes Ledger. Are you removing evidence connected to illegal confinement and transfer of retired police canines at the old county hatchery? Victor's face changed. Not fear first. Calculation first, then anger that calculation had been interrupted. You are trespassing. Megan smiled without warmth. So are a lot of viewers, apparently. Her thumb moved across the screen. We are live. Claire stepped out beside her, phone still open. State police are on the line. Rachel stayed behind a pine, recording the plates and Troy's hands on the kennel. Daniel stepped into the edge of the light with Sadie in his arms. Victor saw him. Worse for Victor, he saw Sadie. The dog lifted her head from the blanket. Troy swore. That mother should have frozen by now. The words hit the hollow and stayed there. Megan's camera caught them. Rachel's phone caught them. Claire's face went white with anger. Daniel felt the world narrow, but Sadie's head pressed against his chest, not hiding, holding him in place. In the distance, sirens began. Not local. Higher, faster, coming from the highway. Victor's gaze flicked toward the sound. Evan backed away from the pickup, suddenly uninterested in being useful. Troy raised both hands halfway, looking for the version of himself least responsible. Victor moved. He ran for the black truck, boots kicking snow, expensive coat flaring behind him. Sadie twisted in Daniel's arms with a strength that did not belong to her body. "Sadie," he said. She pushed against the blanket. Claire shouted his name. Daniel tried to hold her gently and failed because she was not moving from panic. She was moving from purpose. She dropped into the snow, stumbled, nearly fell, then forced herself between Victor and the open driver's door. The hollow went silent except for sirens, camera static, and Sadie's harsh breathing. She was too weak to attack, too thin to frighten anyone who measured danger by muscle. But Victor looked at her and saw something worse than teeth. Recognition. Survival. A witness he had failed to erase. Daniel stepped beside Sadie. For one bright second, he wanted Victor to give him a reason. One step. One hand. One excuse. Claire's voice came from behind him, low and fierce. "Daniel." Rachel whispered Brian's name. Duke whimpered from the kennel. Daniel lowered himself to one knee beside Sadie instead. His hand settled lightly on her shoulder over the blanket. "No," he said, not to Victor, but to the part of himself waiting to become useful in the wrong way. "Not this time." Sadie leaned against him. Daniel looked up at Victor. "This time, the truth goes before the anger." Blue and red lights broke through the trees. The state police vehicles entered the hollow with their lights painting the snow red, blue, until every tree seemed to blink awake and choose a side. 3 cruisers came first, then an unmarked SUV that stopped behind the black pickup before Victor could decide whether running on foot would look worse than surrender. Captain Angela Ruiz stepped out into the work lights. 44 years old, medium height, brown-skinned, black hair tucked beneath a winter cap, her face built for decisions rather than performance. She moved without hurry, and somehow that made everyone else look late. Her team spread fast, professional, weapons low but visible. "Hands where I can see them," Ruiz ordered. Her voice did not need volume. Troy lifted both hands. Evan lifted his so quickly he almost dropped his phone. Victor raised his slowly, expression shifting into a legal shape. "Captain, this is a misunderstanding involving trespassers and private property." Ruiz looked at the kennel, the bins, the camera in Megan's hand, Claire's phone, Daniel kneeling beside a wounded German Shepherd mother, and Rachel half hidden with a thermal pouch against her chest. "Then it has a lot of props," she said. That was when Daniel decided he liked her. Claire was already moving toward Duke. "Permission to assess the dog?" Ruiz nodded to a trooper. "Escort her. Document first contact." The young trooper, a broad-faced man with kind hands, opened the kennel while Claire spoke softly through the wire. Duke stayed pressed into the back corner, tan coat dulled by grime, black muzzle scarred, eyes flat with the terrible patience of animals that have learned pleading can make things worse. "I know," Claire said. "No one is asking you to believe us yet." She slid a lead in slowly, then waited. Duke sniffed once. His body trembled. The trooper kept his hands visible. Together they lifted the kennel door and guided him out. His taped paw touched snow and buckled. Claire caught his chest before he fell. "Easy. You are not equipment anymore." Megan's live stream kept running until Ruiz held up a hand. "Miss Price, keep recording, but step back behind that line. No faces of my officers without clearance." "Yes, Captain." Megan moved, which impressed Daniel more than he expected. Rachel continued recording plates until a trooper asked for her phone as potential evidence. She handed it over only after he promised to make a forensic copy and return it. "Teacher?" he asked, glancing at her steady glare. "Second grade," she said. "That tracks." Victor tried again. "Captain, North Star Shield was conducting an authorized removal of old materials from a disputed access site. These people have created a false narrative around an injured stray." Sadie lifted her head at the sound of his voice. The movement was small, but every person near Daniel felt it. Ruiz's eyes moved to her. "That dog has a name?" Daniel answered. "Sadie, retired Milwaukee canine. Reported dead after her handler, Officer Brian Keller, died 4 years ago." Rachel stepped forward. "Brian was my brother. I have the original transfer papers and his investigation files." Claire added, "Sadie's wounds match equipment found here and at the North Star Kennel building. I have photos from both scenes, medical documentation, and missing canine case records." Megan said, "And I have Mr. Adams on live recording saying the mother should have frozen by now." Troy Adams made a sound halfway between protest and prayer. Victor's face tightened. The polished smile still tried to appear, but it had lost the room. Ruiz turned to her team. "Separate them. Secure all vehicles. Nobody touches bins, kennels, or paperwork until photographed." Within minutes, the hollow changed from Victor's cleanup site into a crime scene he no longer owned. Troopers opened plastic bins and documented each layer. Chain leads, nylon restraint lines, muzzles, sedative vials, cut tags, disposable razors, intake sheets, cheap burner phones, veterinary invoices, and laminated cards listing coded dogs by temperament, age, and prior training. A folder from the black pickup held payment records under the heading Site Security Maintenance. Beside several payments were initials that matched Sheriff Mark Ellison's campaign treasurer. Another folder carried Blue Line Canine renewal release forms, many signed within days of officers' funerals, family emergencies, or medical retirements. Neil Carver's name appeared on witness lines so often it began to look less like a signature than a stain. Rachel stood near Claire with Molly and Toby still sleeping against her chest, her face pale but upright. Daniel knew that look. It was the face of someone whose grief had just been given receipts. "He knew," she said quietly. Daniel did not ask who. "Brian, Victor, Ellison, maybe all of them." Sadie sank against Daniel's knee. He lifted her carefully back into the blanket. Her body had spent the last of its borrowed fire. Claire crossed to them after stabilizing Duke under her coat. "She has to go back now." Daniel looked at Ruiz. "Go," the captain said. "I have your statement enough to start. I will need all of you formally by morning." Sheriff Ellison? Claire asked. Ruiz's expression did not change, which was answer enough. He is being contacted by my office, not the other way around. My people are securing his communications request history tonight. Megan lowered her camera slightly. Captain, the public stream already has Victor, the trucks, the dog, and the cleanup before your arrival. I can pull it down if needed for evidence preservation, but copies are out. Ruiz gave her a look. I am not going to pretend I enjoy live streams. I am also not going to pretend corruption dislikes darkness. Preserve the original file. Already done. From near the utility truck, Victor's voice rose. I want my counsel. You will have him, Ruiz said. If Mr. Carver is not busy explaining why his name appears on a stolen dog transfer network. For the first time that night, Victor had nothing ready. Troy began talking before anyone asked the right question. Fear did that. It chewed through loyalty faster than guilt. I only moved what they told me to move. Carver handled papers. Lang handled clients. Ellison said no local trouble. Evans sat on a snow-covered log, shaking so hard a trooper put a blanket around him and kept writing. They said the dogs were unclaimed assets, he said. They said families signed. Rachel turned away, jaw tight. Claire put one hand near her shoulder, not quite touching, the way she had done with Sadie. Daniel watched the troopers carry out every small, ugly thing men had trusted Winter to hide. The hatchery door stood open, work lights glaring on the place where Toby and Molly had nearly gone quiet forever. Snow fell from the roof edge in soft clumps. Somewhere beyond the trees, Lake Superior moved under ice with a sound too deep to be heard, more felt in the bones. Ruiz came to Daniel before he left. Mr. Hayes, from what I see tonight, you were right to keep pushing. Daniel did not know what to do with being believed. He looked at Sadie instead. She pushed. Ruiz's face softened only slightly. Then she has better instincts than half the officials in this county. Claire snorted. Low bar, but appreciate it. Daniel lifted Sadie into the Subaru while Rachel settled the puppies where their mother could see them. Megan stayed behind with Ruiz to transfer footage. Before Daniel closed the door, Rachel touched the edge of Sadie's blanket. Brian said she would remember. Daniel nodded. She did. The drive back to the clinic was quiet, except for Claire calling ahead to her own answering machine, as if an empty building could prepare itself. Sadie slept at last, head turned toward Toby and Molly. Rachel watched the road with one hand on the thermal pouch. Daniel watched the side mirror until the state police lights vanished behind trees. He expected relief. Instead, he felt the beginning of a larger grief. The first door had opened, and behind it were names, dogs, families, signatures, and years. Catching Victor did not bring Brian back. It did not erase the chain around Sadie's neck. It did not unfreeze what nearly happened beneath those boards. But it changed one thing. The truth had moved out of hiding. By midnight, Sheriff Ellison's name was traveling through Marquette County faster than the storm, not as authority this time, but as evidence. North Star's polished sign still stood near the lake road, promising peace and luxury in gold letters. Under the hatchery lights, troopers loaded the last sealed bin into a state van, and for once, the snow failed the men who had counted on it to cover everything. Dawn found Marquette tired, not peaceful. The storm had moved east over the lake, leaving behind snowbanks, bent pines, and a town full of people pretending they had not watched a live stream at midnight in bathrobes, recliners, kitchen chairs, and patrol cars. At Bennett Veterinary Care, the front blinds stayed half closed, but the parking lot filled anyway. A state police cruiser sat near the door. Megan's black Jeep was parked crooked beside it. Rachel's Subaru leaned into a snow pile like it needed sleep. Inside, Sadie lay on a thick blanket with an IV line running into her front leg. Toby and Molly pressed against her belly under Claire's supervision. They were too weak to nurse properly for long, but the contact mattered. It mattered to Sadie, whose breathing changed whenever both puppies were near. It mattered to Daniel, who stood by the counter trying not to check every breath and failing with professional consistency. Claire looked up from Duke's bandaged paw.
If you keep staring at them like that, the puppies are going to file a complaint. Against who? You. Possibly the entire human species. Duke lay on a mat in the corner, the rescued Belgian Malinois from the hatchery, lean and tan, black-faced, one ear torn, eyes fixed on the door. He had allowed Claire to clean his paw only after she spent 10 minutes sitting on the floor, pretending not to care whether he liked her. That had worked better than affection. Affection was too loud for some survivors. Captain Angela Ruiz arrived at 8:10 with 2 detectives and a box of evidence seals. She carried herself the same way she had in the Hollow, calm enough to make Panic feel embarrassed. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "Dr. Bennett, Ms. Keller, I know no one slept. We need statements while memory is fresh." Megan raised a hand from the office doorway. "My memory is caffeinated and available." Ruiz gave her a look. "Your footage is also evidence, Ms. Price." Try not to narrate during the statement. I make no promises about facial expressions. The morning became paperwork, but not the dead kind. This paperwork breathed. Daniel described finding Sadie at the fence, the patch, the trail, the hatchery, Toby and Molly under the boards. Claire documented wounds, temperatures, restraint marks, dehydration, the old cinch scar, Duke's condition, and the match between injuries and equipment seized. Rachel provided Brian's USB, original transfer papers, notebook, and photographs. Megan handed over copies of the live stream, the raw recording, and her corporate files tracing Blue Line Canine renewal to North Star Shield vendors. Ruiz listened more than she spoke. That made people tell the truth in fuller pieces. Around noon, one of the detectives stepped into the treatment room with a folder. "Captain, we confirmed the Malinois chip scar." Duke lifted his head at the word Malinois, though no one had said his name. Old records from Traverse City PD list him as Duke. Handler was Officer Linda Sutter, retired after a spinal injury. Family was told Duke went to a police dog sanctuary downstate. Claire's jaw tightened. "Is she alive?" "Yes, we called. She is driving here with her husband." Duke watched the door for the next 5 hours. No one knew how much he understood, but dogs knew waiting in ways people had forgotten. Sadie slept through much of the afternoon, waking only when Toby squeaked or Molly nosed blindly under her chin. Rachel sat beside her and read parts of Brian's notebook aloud in a low voice. Not the ugly parts, the training notes. Sadie hates liver treats unless Daniel buys them, because apparently she respects bad financial decisions. Sadie will find hidden keys faster than evidence techs and then look disappointed in everyone. Sadie knocked over my coffee and showed no remorse, which means she is management material. Daniel listened from the sink, one hand around a mug he did not drink from. Every sentence reminded him that Brian had been more than a victim, more than a file reopened, more than a warning ignored. He had been funny, irritating, alive. That was the problem with justice. It could correct the record, but it could not fill a chair. Near sunset, a gray pickup pulled into the lot. Officer Linda Sutter came in using 2 canes, her husband behind her with one hand hovering near her back and the other holding an old leather leash. Linda was 55, broad-faced, silver hair cut short, eyes already wet and refusing to apologize. Duke stood before anyone called him. He did not bark.
He did not leap. For one heartbeat he froze, as if hope itself might be another trick. Then Linda said, "Duke." The Malinois crossed the room with his head low and pressed himself against her knees so hard she sat down on the floor because standing became irrelevant. Her canes clattered.
Her husband turned away and wiped his face with his sleeve. Duke made a sound Daniel had never heard from a police dog in public. A small, broken whine pulled from somewhere too old for training. Linda put both hands against his neck, careful of the scars, and bowed over him. Nobody spoke. Not even Megan. Some moments did not need commentary. They needed witnesses. Later, after Linda and Duke had been moved into the quiet exam room, Ruiz returned with news. Victor Lang had been arrested on charges tied to animal cruelty, fraud, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy pending expansion. Neil Carver had been detained in Grand Rapids after trying to board a flight to Chicago with 2 phones and no believable explanation. Sheriff Mark Ellison had been placed on administrative suspension while state investigators served warrants on his office, home, and campaign records. Troy Adams was cooperating. Evan Pike was cooperating faster. North Star Harbor Lodge? Claire asked. Emergency injunction, Ruiz said.
No site activity until court review. We found enough in the trucks and hatchery to freeze the project for now. Rachel looked down at Brian's notebook in her lap. And my brother's crash. Ruiz took longer with that answer. Respect did that when truth was not ready. We have opened a review. I cannot promise what it will prove, but it will not stay closed because someone once wrote the word accident. Rachel nodded. Her shoulders shook once, but she did not cry then. She had used the day for other work. Daniel walked Ruiz to the clinic door. Outside, the town was beginning to glow with evening porch lights. A man across the street stood in the laundromat window holding his phone, watching the clinic as if it had become a place where the county's hidden things came to be named. You were right to push, Ruiz said again. Daniel looked at the snow-crusted sidewalk. Brian pushed. Sadie pushed. Claire pushed.
I mostly arrived late. Arriving late is different from staying gone. The words landed harder than he expected. When Daniel returned to the treatment room, Rachel was asleep in the chair, Brian's notebook open in her lap. Claire was feeding Molly drop by drop. Toby had managed to wedge himself halfway under Sadie's foreleg and looked offended that gravity existed. Sadie opened one amber eye as Daniel sat beside her. You found the way, he whispered. Her eye closed again. The case had begun to move beyond the clinic, beyond Marquette, beyond one developer and one sheriff. Phones rang, files uploaded, families were contacted. A network that had lived inside polite forms and patriotic language began to feel the weight of names. But in that room, under warm lights, the whole victory was smaller and better. A mother breathing, 2 puppies alive. A rescued dog sleeping near the woman who had never stopped missing him. And Daniel Hayes staying in the room long after the old version of him would have disappeared into the dark. The weeks after the arrests did not become simple just because the truth had finally stepped into daylight. Truth had paperwork. Truth had lawyers. Truth had men in expensive coats using careful words like misunderstanding, procedural confusion, inherited liability, and disputed ownership. Victor Lang hired attorneys who smiled in measured portions and spoke as if dogs were misplaced property. Neil Carver claimed he had only witnessed forms provided by client agencies. Sheriff Mark Ellison claimed campaign donations from North Star vendors were community support, not payment for silence. Some claims lasted longer than dignity should have allowed, but the evidence had weight now. Megan Price's live stream had been copied,
clipped, slowed, transcribed, shared, and watched by people who had never heard of Marquette County before midnight.
Captain Ruiz's team recovered intake sheets, sedative logs, cut collars, invoices, donor records, and messages that linked Blue Line K-9 renewal to North Star Shield and 2 out-of-state security contractors. Brian's USB placed the beginning of the pattern 4 years in the past. Claire's medical photographs matched wounds on surviving dogs. Daniel's images from the first night showed the hatchery before Victor's men stripped it clean. Rachel's release form proved Sadie had not vanished by accident. She had been taken under a lie shaped like compassion. Inside Bennett Veterinary Care, however, justice sounded less like headlines and more like bottles, bandages, mops, and the tiny, greedy suck of puppies learning that food would come again. Toby grew first, of course. He took to living with shameless enthusiasm, belly rounding, paws spreading, voice rising whenever service disappointed him. Molly remained smaller and quieter. But she learned to climb over the towel roll before he did, then sat on the other side with the solemn expression of someone who had invented travel. Sadie healed in layers. The rope wound closed, leaving raw, pink skin beneath returning fur. The older cinch scar stayed visible, a pale, broken line around her neck. Not ugly exactly, but honest, in a way no one wanted honesty to have to be. Some mornings she stood without help. Some mornings her back legs shook after 2 steps, and Claire made her lie down while Sadie glared like a citizen denied constitutional rights. Daniel spent most nights at the clinic on a cot in the storage room. He told himself it was practical. Sadie needed monitoring. The puppies needed feeding. Claire needed someone to fix the back door latch and carry dog food. All of that was true. It was also true that his cabin had grown too quiet after the hatchery. Quiet was different once a man had heard 2 puppies breathing under his coat, and a dead friend's voice asking him to follow the dog. Claire noticed, but she did not press. She only placed a second mug of coffee on the counter each morning and complained when he repaired things too thoroughly. "You made this shelf level," she said one Tuesday. "Now it is showing off and making the rest of the clinic insecure." Daniel tightened a screw. "I can break it again." "That would be emotionally consistent with the building." Rachel returned to Green Bay for her students, but every Friday afternoon she drove back with classroom drawings, donated blankets, and a tote bag full of baby wipes because second-grade teachers understood logistics better than most governments. Her students knew only that Ms. Keller was helping rescue police dogs. They sent cards with crayon paw prints and messages like, "Get well, Sadie," and "Dear Toby, do not bite too much." Rachel taped them to the clinic wall. Sadie inspected each one with serious attention, then tried to eat the corner of a drawing showing her as a superhero with wings. "Critic," Rachel said. "Brian would approve." Daniel and Rachel learned how to speak about Brian without stepping around his name like broken glass. Not always. Some days the name still cut. But they said it anyway. They read more of his notebook to Ruiz's investigators. They gave context to jokes, acronyms, officer names, old routes. Daniel admitted where he had dismissed Brian's concerns. Rachel admitted how much she had wanted the official version to be true because an accident was easier to survive than betrayal. Claire, who had become allergic to nonsense through years of treating animals and their owners, told them both guilt was a poor substitute for work. Then she handed them towels, files, bottles, dogs. Work helped. Not cured. Helped. Duke recovered enough to travel home with Linda Sutter. But not before he spent a week at the clinic, learning that doors could open without punishment. The reunion video Megan posted with Linda's permission did more good than any speech. Families began calling. A retired firefighter from Ohio asked about a search dog taken by a charity after a stroke.
A widow in Illinois sent papers for a shepherd transferred after her husband's line-of-duty death. A veteran in Idaho identified a collar in evidence. The network was larger than Marquette, but it was no longer invisible. North Star Harbor Lodge sat frozen under court order, its sign still bright beside the road, though someone had spray-painted "liars" across the bottom before the sheriff's office could decide whether enforcing vandalism laws during a corruption probe looked ridiculous. Earl Whitaker, an old commercial fisherman who had once told Claire she was seeing conspiracies in snowdrifts, arrived at the clinic with 2 bags of dog food and no eye contact. He was 74, bow-legged, sunburned even in winter, and stubborn enough to make granite reconsider. "Dogs gotta eat," he said. Claire took the bags. "Thank you, Earl." He cleared his throat. "You were right." Claire had waited months for those words, and no longer needed them as much as she once had. "There are blankets in the car?" she asked. Earl blinked. "How did you know?" "You are bad at acting casual." After Earl, help came unevenly, awkwardly, beautifully. A church group brought towels. A retired librarian brought envelopes of cash labeled for veterinary expenses in handwriting so neat it looked like a moral standard. 2 high school brothers built a donation page and argued for an hour over whether the font looked trustworthy. The bait shop owner donated a freezer for food storage. The laundromat owner washed blankets for free and pretended the machines had a special dog setting. Marquette did not transform overnight. Towns rarely did. Some people defended Ellison longer than decency required. Some whispered that Claire had made the county look bad. Some said Daniel had dragged old trauma into public. But more people showed up than looked away, and that mattered. One evening in late March, Rachel found a folded paper tucked into the back of Brian's notebook. It was not evidence, not exactly. A sketch. A rough plan for a fund supporting retired canines whose handlers had died or become disabled. Brian had drawn a clumsy logo, a lighthouse beam crossing a paw print. Under it, he had written, "Someday, when paperwork stops being evil." Rachel laughed, then cried so quickly the two became the same sound. Daniel took the page carefully. Claire leaned over his shoulder. "He wanted a rescue fund." Rachel nodded, wiping her face. "He wanted Sadie to be the first ambassador. He said she could raise money by looking disappointed in donors." Sadie, lying on her bed with Toby chewing her ear and Molly asleep across her paw, lifted her head as if insulted by the accuracy. Daniel looked at the sketch, then out the back window toward the dark road leading north. The old hatchery remained taped and sealed under state evidence control, but one day it would be released. One day the building where Sadie had nearly lost everything would either rot or become something else. "Then we make it something else," Daniel said. Claire looked at him. Rachel did too. Daniel kept his eyes on Brian's drawing. "Harbor-like canine rescue," he said. "If the county will lease the hatchery, we turn the place that held them into a place that gets them home." For the first time in weeks, Rachel smiled without breaking. "Brian would have hated how good that sounds," she said. Toby sneezed. Molly squeaked, and Sadie laid her head back down with the air of a mother who had always known humans were slow. Spring did not arrive in Marquette like a miracle. It came grudgingly, in dirty snowbanks shrinking beside roads, in icicles loosening from gutters, in the smell of thawed mud and lake wind, in the first stubborn gulls yelling over the harbor as if they had been personally inconvenienced by winter. The old hatchery stayed locked behind evidence tape until April, while court orders, county meetings, insurance letters, and legal objections wandered through offices with all the speed of tired cattle. Victor Lang's attorneys argued the building sat on disputed access land. Captain Ruiz produced maps, maintenance records, and enough seized documents to make that dispute look like fog machine work. North Star's injunction held. Sheriff Ellison's replacement stopped returning calls from people who wanted the whole matter handled quietly. Quiet had lost popularity. When the county finally granted a temporary lease for recovery and nonprofit use, Claire stood in the clinic office holding the letter, eyes moving over the words twice before she trusted them. "We got it," she said. Rachel covered her mouth. Daniel looked at Sadie, who was lying on a blanket near the door while Toby attempted to bite his own back foot, and Molly watched, unimpressed. "You hear that?" he asked. Sadie's ear twitched. "Your old prison is about to become very inconvenient for bad men." Claire pointed at him with the letter. "No speeches to the dog that include revenge themes before breakfast." It was more of a facilities update. The first workday at the hatchery brought half the town, which surprised Daniel enough that he stood in the parking area holding a hammer and saying nothing for almost a minute. Earl Whitaker arrived with lumber and a thermos large enough to suggest he feared thirst as a moral failure. The high school brothers brought a drill set and immediately argued about whether safety glasses looked dramatic. The retired librarian, Mrs. Pauline Abbott, brought labels, clipboards, and a tone of voice that made unorganized donations straighten themselves. The laundromat owner brought fresh blankets. A church group brought sandwiches and prayed before work, without making anyone who did not know the words feel outside the circle. Megan came with a camera, but for once, she mostly used it to take photos for the donation site. Captain Ruiz stopped by in plain clothes, dropped off a box of seized but cleared dog bowls, and left before anyone could thank her too much. The hatchery had changed since the night of the arrest, but the bones of it still remembered. The door hung repaired but scarred. The back corner where Toby and Molly had been found had been photographed, measured, and released. Yet Daniel stood there a long time before touching the floor. Claire came beside him, holding a pry bar. "We can leave this section out if you want." Daniel shook his head. "No, we fix it." "You sure?" He looked at the boards. Brian did not want a shrine. He wanted a root out. So they pulled the old boards, removed every rusted nail, scrubbed the concrete, sealed it, and laid thick rubber matting where straw and fear had been. The steel ring that had held Sadie's chain had already gone into evidence, but the hole remained in the support beam. Daniel filled it with wood epoxy, sanded it smooth, then placed his palm over the spot for a second before painting. No ceremony, no speech, just the hand and the work. Work lasted days, then weeks. The building received new insulation, repaired plumbing, secure kennels with soft bedding, a small treatment room, storage shelves, a fenced exercise yard, cameras, lights, and a front sign carved from cedar. Rachel managed donations with the ferocity of a teacher organizing a field trip in a thunderstorm. She created the Brian Keller Canine Fund using his lighthouse paw sketch, $300 from her savings, and a folding table outside the clinic. By the end of the first month, the fund had paid for Duke's medication, transport for 2 recovered shepherds, and puppy vaccines for Toby and Molly. Claire opened a free examination day for retired police and rescue dogs every other Saturday. She said it was temporary. Nobody believed her, including Sadie, who made a habit of lying near the treatment room door like a silent auditor. Daniel moved tools into the hatchery's back room, then a cot, then a coffee pot. He did not announce that he was spending more nights there than at his cabin. Claire noticed. Claire noticed everything. She only left an extra blanket folded on the cot and wrote, Wash this mug on tape across his coffee cup after the third day. Whatever had begun between them was not soft enough to name and not fragile enough to deny. It lived in shared late feedings, quiet repairs, arguments about medication logs, and the way Claire could say his name when anger stepped too close to the wheel. Rachel saw it and said nothing for almost 2 weeks, which Daniel considered a miracle. Then one morning, after Claire corrected the way he mixed puppy formula and he obeyed without sarcasm, Rachel leaned close and whispered, "Brian would be making ambulance noises right now." Daniel nearly dropped the bottle. Toby and Molly grew as if personally offended by their small beginning. Toby became round, loud, and convinced shoelaces were a public resource. Molly, smaller and quieter, became the first to climb out of the puppy pen, waddling across the clinic floor with great seriousness until Sadie caught her by the scruff and deposited her back where children belonged. Sadie's coat began to shine again in patches. Her ribs softened under food and time. The scar around her neck remained, silver and broken beneath new fur. She did not regain the easy strength of old photographs, and no one pretended she would. Survival was not the same as restoration. It was something tougher, less pretty, more honest. On the first warm evening in May, they raised the cedar sign above the hatchery door. Harbor Light Canine Rescue. The letters were uneven in 2 places because Toby had stolen Daniel's glove during sanding and run 6 heroic feet before tripping over it. Claire said the imperfections made the sign honest. Daniel said she was being polite. Rachel said Brian would have made it crooked on purpose and called it strategy. Sadie sat below the sign, 2 puppies tumbling around her front legs, Duke visiting with Linda Sutter at her side, and 3 rescue dogs watching from the new kennels as if they were not yet ready to believe good walls could hold. The final light of day spread gold across the thawing yard, touching the pine trunks, the patched roof, the clean water bowls, the people carrying blankets inside. The air smelled of sawdust, wet earth, dog food, and spring grass. It did not erase the smell Daniel remembered from that first night. Nothing erased that. But it gave the place a second scent, and sometimes that was how mercy worked. Not by pretending cruelty had never lived there, but by making it share the address with bowls, blankets, medicine, laughter, and dogs learning to sleep. Near sunset, Captain Ruiz called. Rachel answered on speaker because her hands were full of donation receipts. Ruiz's voice was calm, but there was something beneath it. "I wanted you to hear directly. The review into Officer Brian Keller's death is officially reopened as a criminal inquiry. We found communications between Ellison, Carver, and a North Star contractor from the week before the crash." Rachel sat down on the step. Daniel closed his eyes. Claire's hand found his wrist, light and steady. Sadie leaned her shoulder against his boot. Rachel looked up at the new sign through tears and smiled. "You hear that, Brian?" she whispered. A breeze moved through the pines. Toby sneezed. Molly barked once, a ridiculous tiny sound aimed at the universe. Daniel laughed before he could stop himself. A real laugh. It did not feel like betrayal this time. It felt like air. The first public hearing was held on a clear June morning in the Marquette County Courthouse, where sunlight came through tall windows and made the polished benches look kinder than most legal rooms deserved. Rachel sat between Daniel and Claire with Brian's notebook in her lap, no longer needed as proof but carried because some objects became companions after surviving the dark. Megan sat 2 rows back with a legal pad and the expression of a woman trying hard not to enjoy the discomfort of corrupt men. Captain Ruiz stood near the aisle in dress uniform, calm as stone. Sadie could not enter the hearing room, but she waited outside in the courtyard with Toby and Molly under the care of Linda Sutter, who had driven up with Duke because some reunions created families by accident, and no one involved had the bad manners to object. The hearing did not fix everything. It did not bring Brian Keller through the courthouse doors laughing about bad coffee. It did not give Sadie back the years stolen from her, or restore the puppies who had not survived before Daniel found Toby and Molly. It did not make Daniel less late to the truth. But it did something. It placed the lie under lights. Investigators confirmed that Brian had been tracking illegal transfers of retired and displaced working dogs before his death. They confirmed Blue Line Canine Renewal had operated as a shell, using patriotic language and police family grief to obtain signatures. They confirmed Neil Carver had witnessed false releases, Victor Lang had benefited through North Star Shield, and Sheriff Mark Ellison had received payments disguised through campaign vendors while discouraging reports, delaying calls, and labeling witnesses unstable. When Brian's name was read into the record, Rachel bowed her head, but did not break. Daniel felt Claire's shoulder near his, not leaning, just there. Outside, a dog barked once, high and young. Toby, probably. He had opinions about closed doors. The sound slipped into the hearing room through the old window frame. A few people turned. Rachel smiled through tears. Brian would have loved the interruption. Victor Lang did not look toward the sound. He sat beside his attorney, face smaller than it had been in the hatchery lights, his polished confidence worn thin by discovery motions and video evidence. Neil Carver looked older without the protection of procedure. Ellison stared at the table as if the wood might offer him a county where nobody had asked questions. The judge set dates. Charges moved forward. North Star Harbor Lodge remained frozen. Blue Line Canine Renewal was dissolved under state and federal review. More dogs were still being traced across state lines, and not every call to a family ended with good news. That mattered too. Happy endings that refused to carry sorrow were only decorations. This one carried names. After the hearing, everyone gathered in the courtyard where June had softened the edges of the town. Lake wind moved through the maple leaves. Sadie lay in the shade beside a stone bench, thinner than she had been in Brian's old photos, older than memory wanted her, but alive. Her black and tan coat had grown glossy along her shoulders, though the silver scar around her neck still showed when the light caught it. Toby, now all paws and confidence, attacked a dandelion with grave determination. Molly climbed onto Daniel's boot, sat there as if claiming jurisdiction, then barked at Duke, who looked away with the exhausted patience of a senior officer mentoring a recruit. Linda laughed. Rachel knelt beside Sadie and placed one hand near the dog's head. Sadie touched her nose to Rachel's wrist. Permission. Trust. Not perfect, not cheap, but real. Daniel watched Rachel close her eyes. "He was right about you," she whispered. Sadie sighed, which might have meant many things, most of them unflattering toward humans. Megan took one photograph, then lowered the camera before the moment became work. Claire handed Daniel a paper cup of courthouse coffee. He tasted it and winced. "This is evidence." "Of what?" "A crime against beans." Claire smiled. "File a report." Daniel looked across the street where ordinary life had resumed with almost insulting confidence. A delivery truck idled. A woman pushed a stroller. Two men argued about parking. The world did that after Revelation. It kept moving, leaving the wounded to decide whether they would move with it or become monuments to the hour that hurt them. Daniel had tried the monument approach. It was cold and overrated. That afternoon, they returned to Harbor Light Canine Rescue for the first official community open house. No balloons, because Claire said balloons scared dogs and encouraged human foolishness. No speeches longer than 5 minutes, because Rachel said Brian had considered long speeches evidence of weak character. The cedar sign stood above the door, uneven letters warm in the sun. People came in steady waves: police families, retired handlers, church volunteers, teenagers who had built the donation site, Earl Whitaker carrying a box of leashes and pretending it was not sentimental, Mrs. Abbott with a ledger book that could have disciplined a courtroom. Captain Ruiz brought a framed copy of the state recognition naming Harbor Light a partner resource for retired working dog recovery. Megan brought printouts of her article, then pretended she had not seen 3 people cry while reading it. Linda brought Duke, who walked through the new kennels once, sniffed every gate, and chose a patch of sun near Sadie, like a man selecting a porch after years at war. Rachel stood at the donation table beneath Brian's Lighthouse Paw logo.
The Brian Keller Canine Fund had started with $300 and a folding table. By sunset, it held enough pledges to pay for surgeries, transport crates, emergency boarding, and a microchip registry review for every dog connected to the seized records. Daniel watched Rachel write each donor name carefully. Grief had made her precise. Purpose made the precision less lonely. Near evening, when the visitors thinned and the lake breeze cooled, Daniel sat on the hatchery step. The building behind him held clean kennels, warm blankets, medicine, records, and sleeping dogs. In the back corner, where Toby and Molly had once cried beneath rotten boards, Claire had placed a low shelf of folded towels and a small brass plaque. Not a shrine, Rachel had insisted. A marker. It read, "For the ones who waited in the dark, and for the ones who followed." Daniel rested one hand on Sadie's neck, careful over the scar. Her skin was warm beneath his palm. Toby collapsed across her front paws, as if his work in the world had been large and underappreciated. Molly slept against Daniel's boot, one pale-tipped tail flicking in a dream. Claire locked the medicine cabinet, then paused beside him. Rachel closed the donation ledger. Megan leaned against the fence with her camera hanging unused. No one said the old life had been restored. It had not. Brian was still gone. 4 years were still gone. Sadie's lost puppies would not return. Daniel's silence had cost him. The town's silence had cost more than it wanted to admit. But something had been built where a chain once hung. That counted. Daniel looked at the yard, at the people staying late to wash bowls and stack blankets, at dogs sleeping without flinching when the door opened. He understood then that God did not always return what was taken in the same shape. Sometimes he sent a wounded mother into the snow with just enough strength to lead a broken man back to the work he was born to do. Sadie closed her eyes. Toby snored. Molly sighed against his boot. And for the first time in years, Daniel did not listen for what was coming to hurt them. He listened to the quiet and trusted it to stay a little while. Most people would have driven past that fence and told themselves the storm was too strong, the road too dangerous, the problem too complicated. Daniel stopped because one wounded dog was still breathing, and because 2 tiny lives were still hidden where no one else knew to look. That is how mercy often begins in our own lives, not as a grand miracle, but as a small decision to stop, listen, and follow the quiet pull of conscience. Sadie could not explain the truth with words, yet her loyalty carried a message stronger than any speech. She reminds us that love protects, faith endures, and courage sometimes means doing the next right thing before we can see the whole road. If this story touched your heart, write Amen in the comments. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that God can still bring light from a place of pain. May your home be protected.
May the burdens you carry in silence grow lighter, and may you never ignore the small cry that asks you to look closer.